Welcome to another episode of Distory. My name is Kirk from walruscarp.com, and tonight we are talking about the defunct, gone, forgotten since 2001 attraction, Rocket Rods. Now, this is not going to be one of our epic Iliad version Odysseys where we go multi-parts, because there's not a lot to tell, but it is an interesting story. And with me, as always, is our co-host, the Disney Cicerone, Kate, the ever-professional, wonderful historian that we know. Kate, how are we doing this evening?
I am very excited to be talking about Rocket Rods, even though it was such a short-lived attraction. I feel like it's gotten a lot of hate over the years because of what it replaced. So we're going to knock this out, one single episode all about the Rocket Rods. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. And I was excited to learn a little bit more because I actually found some things I didn't know about it. So
I knew nothing until today. So no, that's not true. I knew it existed. That was about it. And I knew that it replaced the old people mover.
It did, yes, which is why a lot of people don't like it. But we'll get more into that. I feel like we should start at the very beginning, right? Let's start in its concept like we usually do. Let's dig into that. So before it was there, we won't get too much into the history of the people mover. We've already talked a little bit about its technology in an Omnimover episode, but I feel like the people mover needs its own series because it's just such an iconic ride. But if you remember, this is what the people mover looked like in Disneyland. It had these little covered carriages, and it would.
I love that the Skyways in the background of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Two modes of transportation that no longer exist in Disneyland.
It's true, and Disneyland's Tomorrowland, you have to think of it like a layer cake, like a 5-layer cake. Okay, so it originally had up in the sky. I know it had.
Should I get a fork? What am I doing here?
Up in the sky, it had the Skyway, and then we had the monorail, and we had the people mover, and then we had Autopia, and then we had the submarine ride. So it's a layer cake of transportation is what we had in the original, well, not original, but like 1959 on version of Tomorrowland and Disneyland. So the people mover was part of that, and its tracks, it was a lot, I would dare say a little bit longer than the one that we have now in the Magic Kingdom.
Apparently it went between 6 and 7 miles per hour based on my research, and it took roughly about 12 minutes to 16. Traverse the entire. Really?
Depends on how fast it's going that day.
So yeah, I mean it was sizable, its track, and that time is important as we talk about the transition to Rocket Rods as well.
Yeah,
but it was huge and very scenic, and people loved it. Nostalgic too. I think this harkens back to the fact that there is always a need to change things, but people will always hold on to the past and have a reverence for it. And I don't know if this is a good replacement because now we have nothing. So
it's true. So, so that's all we're going to mention about the people mover, just because for interest of time, and we really want to do the people mover history well by getting into that. So in spring of 1998, they did a $100 million renovation of Tomorrowland, which opened in Disneyland. Now, the plan for this was originally going to be a complete facelift of this land, similar to Euro Disneyland's Discoveryland. However, as we've talked about before, Euro Disneyland was a complete financial failure, almost went bankrupt. So that made everything else in Disney's world be scaled back, including this remodel of Tomorrowland. So Tomorrowland got a smaller update and would reuse some existing elements that they already had, like these people mover tracks. And they would bring in things like, that's why we had the Orbitron, which is from Disneyland Paris, and this kind of coppery look to it was because of all the Disneyland Paris, which was Euro Disney at the time's influence. Tony Baxter was the one that oversaw this Tomorrowland renovation, and he said, "Freedom stayed valid and the innovations become museum pieces. Reality overtakes a lot of the technological stuff, so we wanted to show the spirit. This is how they dreamed of space when space was a dream." So that was the concept behind this renovation, which I think is really interesting. But you can also see
I think, it's an impossible task to make anything in Tomorrowland look like it's from tomorrow.
Yes.
You know? I mean, we still have things that, like, every time I leave Space Mountain, and it reminds me of Horizons with that robot butler, and I know we're getting super advanced robotics, but yet that's still far off, but it looks retro. I don't know how to explain it. It's like looking at the Jetsons now. You're like, that's still futuristic because we don't have any of these things, but yet it still looks dated. So that's kind of, it's hard with the contemporary view. But yeah, I can see where Tony's coming from.
Yeah, it's tough. And, that's why they say Discoveryland in Paris looks so, it doesn't look dated, because it really is more just kind of this retro steampunk vibe, where it wasn't really trying to predict any sort of future. It was like, this is just kind of like the dream of the future from the past. So
yeah. I mean, so the whole process is trying to think about the future and taking a journey through that while saving money, but make an ambitious attraction in an already existing space. So you're having all of these conflicting ideals. And so it's like, what are they going to put together based on the shoestring budget that they have? So, because the People Mover is massively iconic, so were the rocket jets, but the whole concept of a new attraction, which is going to be named Rocket Rods, was aimed to usher us to a new era of a futuristic transportation experience. But if you look at the actual Rocket Rods, like I still don't want to get too far into it, but a lot of what is existing for the People Mover just gets new vehicles and a couple of different ride sequences, and then takes over a couple of other areas. For example, the 360 Circle Vision Theater becomes a part of the queue here as well. So everything is very much take what we have and repurpose it somehow. Yeah, it's upcycling.
Upcycling, yes. Very good way of putting it. Absolutely. Yeah. And so the idea of the rocket rods, I'll get there how we got to that in a second, but I will say that this was Michael Eisner's idea, the rocket rods, because he said,
"Oh, Michael, you know what to do, dude. You want to make it exciting." Oh my gosh, this is like, I know. So I didn't want to. You brought it up. I didn't want to bring it up, but you brought.
So if the original People Mover went 16 or 12, I guess, depending on your source, minutes around the track, he wanted to make a ride that would go under 3 minutes around the same track, so a lot faster. He said, as a type A person, I wanted something faster than the People Mover. So the People Mover, of course, was a leisurely ride that could be used to move large amounts of people, but rocket rods served people who needed to get somewhere fast. So it was, I ran into something that was kind of an interesting thought about this, that is a commentary on the changing nature of humanity, because humans are continually trying to get places faster with less and less regard for the journey and the sights one could see along the way. And I thought that was really an interesting concept to think about, like just the changing nature of our society and how we want everything faster and faster and faster, but we sacrifice something.
Fair.
I mean, I'm not saying it's horrible, maybe this is just the way things are going to go, but there is a trade-off when you trade efficiency for speed.
All I would say is, again, and this harkens to very, very similar thought process. If you look at a lot of the attractions and a lot of the locations that were built in the Eisner era, Pleasure Island, it's New Year's Eve every single night. It is a party atmosphere with lots of different venues for adults to have fun. The alien encounter, extraterrestrial, super, super scary. All of these things are to be more thrilling so that young adults won't venture off to other theme parks to try to, chase down bigger and bigger thrills. So Rocket Rods is a part of that same exact hypothesis that people need more thrills. And the best way that I could wrap my head around Rocket Rods is, imagine you're on test track, but it has to slow down. Actually, you know what? Imagine you're on test track in the center. Like the center part, not the outside part, because the outside part, you do get to 65 miles per hour and you never have to slow down because of the banked curves. But Rocket Rods reminds me so much of the inside interior. You're always stopping. You're always doing a quick turn. on the inside of that section for test track. So if you want to pretend you're on rocket rods, just close your eyes when you're in test track.
Yeah, like a virtual reality glasses.
Like you don't want to you slam the brakes shut and you just, it's very much rocket rod.
So let's talk about the concept for it a little bit for rocket rods before we get into the actual ride. This was supposed to be the new transportation system for the future. So they branded it Ride the Road to Tomorrow, okay? So, but before there was rocket rods, which was Kirk is showing it bikes. And this was an attraction that was planned to be in the new version of Tomorrowland at Tokyo Disneyland called Sci-Fi City. So, this is interesting because they look so much to me like almost like a light cycle. I have a picture of it for you guys. But you see this bike that's up near Space Mountain? This was going to be the rocket bikes.
Yeah, it's Tron.
Mm-hmm.
It's straight up Tron. But look at the ride capacity. You put one person in that thing. Not exactly logical.
It's true. But this is I'll zoom out a little bit. This is all Sci-Fi City, which never ended up actually happening for a number of reasons. But so the rocket bikes went into the prototype phase. And then, so a test track for it was built at a WDI facility. Eddie Soto, Imagineer, who was working on the project, rode on the prototype and loved it. A whole bunch of people tried it and loved it. So there was this interest for rocket bikes in Disneyland, but Paul Pressler, who, if you know him, he canceled a lot of really amazing projects in Disneyland before he got canceled. He was president of the Disneyland Resort, and he did not want a non-IP bike in Disneyland, in Tomorrowland. So he thought of using the ride system for a Star Wars Return of the Jedi Endor speeder bike attraction, which how amazing would that have been?
Dude, why did we get that?
I know, but the proposal failed, so we never got that. So they proposed to put rocket bikes on the existing People Mover track at Disneyland during the redo of Tomorrowland. So it was going to be rocket bikes, but the tunnels that go inside Carousel of Progress, which was then America Sings Becoming Innovations at the time, the tunnels did not have enough clearance for, like, people could put out their hands and potentially, like, lose a digit. So it just, safety-wise, it didn't work. And there's no way they could renovate that tunnel to make it work without it costing a lot of money. And they went back to the drawing board. So the rocket bikes then transformed into the rocket rods, which is this futuristic hot rod, electric cars that are capable of wheelies that were designed by Imagineer Bruce Gordon. I will just say this little note about rocket bikes before we move into the car design. The Oriental Land Company that owned Tokyo Disney still wanted to build rocket bikes, even though they kind of like scaled down their Tomorrowland. But when they decided, when they saw Disneyland's proposal for rocket rods instead of rocket bikes, they're like, oh, we want that instead. That looks like way cooler. However, when they didn't get to the actual like implementing it side before they saw it fail at Disneyland, and they're like, okay, no, we don't want that. Never mind. So, so this never ended up in Tokyo Disney because they watched it kind of not do so great at Disneyland. But,
yeah, they had the benefit of hindsight there.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the cars a little bit?
Sure. So if you look at the ride vehicles themselves, it's a really unique system. They actually put a tube single rail. So if you're a roller coaster fan, you'll know all about single rails. And you have a wheel system, and then in the back, it's motorized through electric. So there's an electric rail system that goes through this. I couldn't confirm that it was the same system as like an LSM or an LIM, which would be like a linear induction motor, but the time period would fit with the technology that was out. But I can't confirm or deny that it was that specific type. But it.
Oh, I have info on that. It worked as a similar ride system to Test Track that was being developed for Epcot, but it was a retrofit of the basic principles of the slot car ride system, and actually bolted new hardware to the existing tracks with electricity powering H rods on board electric motor.
I love that. That's so cool. Dude, what's amazing to me is when you have that immediacy, like people who own Teslas understand this as well. Or if you've been on any roller coaster that has some sort of launch system, that immediate access to speed is both the thrilling element of this attraction, or supposed thrilling part of this attraction, but it also led to its downfall. If you look at one of the biggest flaws of this ride system is what Kate is looking at, which is an actual tire. The tires on here, because of the ability, if you've ever played with slot cars when you were a kid, that instantaneous speed up and slow down needed to happen on this track, because if it took you 6 to 7 miles per hour using the People Movers track, it's nice, it was slow, it took you a long time, 6 to 7 miles per hour. Now we have the ability, using this technology, to go all the way up to 35 miles per hour, which is insanely fast for the differentiation. So, and this and it had to, because none of those turns are banked like in Test Track, similar technology, but they had to slow down. So imagine very fast, thrilling ramp ups in speed, immediate slam on the brakes.
Yeah. So originally, this ride was going to be sponsored by General Motors. It was a thrill ride that was going to be called Fast Track. So it wasn't going to be called Rocket Rods. It was going to be called Fast Track at Disneyland, similarly to Test Track. It was a wireframe vehicle, and at night they were all going to glow and customize their vehicles, and the attraction would capture a photo of them riding in their design. General Motors was even going to receive all the data, including guest preferred vehicle colors and shapes, so it would help them as a company as well. But all that went away, and it fell back to being what they could afford to do, because General Motors was basically, they were really upset that Test Track was taking so long to build. So Test Track took 3 years after its planned premiere to actually open, because the technology they had so much time, a hard time with the technology. So when Disneyland asked, like, hey, do you want to sponsor a similar attraction in Disneyland? They're like, no. Thanks, but no thanks. So so that's why we never got that also would have paid for the track to be renovated so that it was banked properly, so that actually was a fast track. So because GM pulled their sponsorship, and because Euro Disney was like failing, both of those things meant they had zero money for this project essentially, and they had to just do what they could with what they had. But like you said, the track itself was not designed at all to have these cars going around it. They weren't banked. And a lot of people say the structure itself couldn't even support the weight and the tension and the stress that the cars were putting on the track from People Mover, because the People Mover just had slow moving cars on it. It didn't have these like cars stopping and starting and all this stuff. So there was a lot of structural problems with this. We'll just say that.
It's a shame, because it's honestly, I know it has its problems and its faults, but I feel like this would have been such a fun attraction. I know it's crazy looking, but it still was the best shot with the amount of money that they had.
I think it was like a lot of these things that happened at Disney, like California Adventure. The Imagineers did the best they could with what they were given, but because of some failures with other projects, they had very limited resources to work with. So they did what they could with what they had, and
yeah.
I think this could have been really amazing had they built it right to begin with. But instead, they didn't have the money. So they just kind of like made a half-done project, so to speak, and it never really worked properly. And here we are. So I think that's why a lot of people didn't like it, because it was broke down all the time. It was, but we can get into that in a little bit. But should we talk about the ride a little bit, the actual ride of what it was like to be in it?
Sure. You know what? Hang on. Before we get there, we can talk about the ride vehicle real quick again with the setup, because we didn't talk about how you actually sat in this. I thought that was unique too, because it is a car, but it sat 1, 1, 2. So it was 3 rows. So it was a single, and 2 in the back. I just thought that was a really interesting layout, considering that it was supposed to be more of a car or a rocket. And even though it's not the single like the rocket bikes would have been, but capacity-wise, Dick Nunis would have never allowed this. This would have never floated by him.
No.
Which I think is just,
Hopalong
crazy.
Cassidy would not have approved. Because he was gone.
The other thing I just wanted to point out was I did have, before we actually get in the attraction, there was a Circle Vision theater that showed basically going from...
I was going to start in the beginning of the queue.
Oh, okay.
We started.
Oh, okay. So, well, you started saying you were going on the ride, bro.
Well, you didn't go on the ride.
Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry. But, okay, we're going to back up a little bit. So,
backing it up.
So it was Tuesday, so we're all just discombobulated. So what we are talking about...
I'm perfectly bobulated.
So the outside of Rocket Rods where you enter is now Astro Blasters, Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters. So if you're familiar with that building now, that's what it looks like. So that is the building. And it used to be the Circle Vision 360 Theater, which is why Kirk has mentioned you go into that in the queue. When you would go into the queue, so they had something that said the Tomorrowland Rapid Transit System was on the walls. And they would also have the Road to Tomorrow would look like this. And Kirk's showing you that Circle Vision Theater. Now, the downside of this Circle Vision Theater, this played slapstick depictions of people riding futuristic concept vehicles and historical Tomorrowland footage with Walt Disney. And unfortunately, it was so short that it played at least 3 times while people were sitting and standing and waiting in this room. You can see this is what the Circle Vision queue looked like. So it was just not long enough especially because this attraction broke down all the time. So people would see this thing a few times in a row before they leave the room, and people would get a little sick of it. But yeah, they also had vehicles exhibited. Did you see these cool vehicles? They had these glow in the dark paint vehicles. This is a This is a Mark III monorail body that they had in there. So they had essentially all this old one. They had people mover cars, these kind of just cars that are sitting in the queue, and then they had the old Astro Jets as well.
Yeah, and then it also had, apparently there was a Space Mountain sled. They put the blueprints up of the Nautilus, and then the Mark III and the Rocket Rod prototype as well.
Yes. And they also had this map that was the Rocket Rod's proposed system expansion. And I know it's a little bit hard for you guys to see here, but it was here's where it currently goes, but here's where it's going to go. And so they have things like a baseball stadium, hockey arena, the beach, the airport, Hollywood, the mountains. They just have stuck everything on there. So they're this is where we're going to expand to, because this is going to be the transportation of the future.
That was Michael Eisner manifesting buying the Anaheim Ducks.
Pretty much. So something that I thought was really interesting is they have a song for this attraction that is called World of Creativity. And it's also called Magic Highways of Tomorrow, depending on what you want to call it. There was actually a reworking of a Sherman Brothers song. Oh, good, you have that too. From Detroit, from the film The Happiest Millionaire. Did you listen to both of these, Kirk? Because was wild.
Can I just tell you I don't like either of them? It is my least favorite Sherman Brothers song.
Well, I like the Happiest Millionaire. At least sounds like a Sherman Brothers song. We can't play it here just because of copyright and whatnot, but I'll probably stick it in the show notes, a link to these songs so you can listen to them side by side. Steve Bartek was the one that remixed this song. He was the accordion player in a band called Oingo Boingo, which is an American new wave band formed by songwriter Danny Elfman.
They're kind of ska-y for back then, because there was all these wind instruments. It was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Steve Bartek said he had no idea where the song was from when he was given it to remix.
Yeah.
He said, I did not know it was based on a song from Happiest Millionaire. I was given a demo of the song with these lyrics and tried to destroy it as much as they would allow, which I think he did a pretty good job, because I was listening to it. I was like, what is this?
It's bad.
It is really bad. I play it for Elliot, and he's like, "What are you listening to?"
Yeah, it had, I don't know, it just sounds like purposefully off. You know, it's just like two clashing sounds together. It's very, very strange. Although, like when they start singing the magic highways of tomorrow are more than what they seem. Ride your mind's designs, ride a dream. Is better than every other part of that, because it is this, like, I don't know. It reminds me of like the doldrums. Like it's like real low and repetitive.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's like a marching song almost.
Yeah, there's like pieces of it that are like listenable, but the rest of it, I'm like, no, like I can't. It's not even atmospheric, you know. It's like usually you get these Disney ones, and you're like, oh, that's just kind of like getting an emotion or a feeling. I'm like, no, it's not that. It's like
no, it's to me, it's chaos. It reminds me of gosh, it's like Metropolis, just like this dystopian robotic, very weird. There's so many layered vocal tracks in there, and none of them are harmonizing. It's like you could play this for anybody and they would go, there's no way the Sherman Brothers wrote that. With how they write music typically, it's a chaotic bop. Get out of here, dude. It's not
I
chaotic.
just want to be very clear that the part that Kirk played was the best part of that song.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I literally saved you from the awfulness of that. That was the good part.
I don't know if it's music or not. Depends on your definition.
I don't know if it's music. I mean, technically everything could be music if you think it is. You just make a bunch of noises and it's music.
It depends.
But it's not good.
Yeah, it does get worse. Like, yes, and
It does get worse. It gets worse.
It starts off worse too. So anyway, we'll that for you guys.
Hear our dreams and ride them too, traveling fast, high above the grounds.
Elliot doesn't agree to disagree. All right, I would love to know Elliot's definition of music because I know he's got a good one. But okay, so that is the song that is. I think they played that as exit music for the attraction, from what I'm understanding. And so from there, you would actually go on a little journey to get to the load platform. Because of the track configuration, they were originally going to have you load onto ride vehicles in the same building where you waited. But because of the changes to the track, they had you exit the theater, and then guests headed downstairs into a tunnel in Tomorrowland that went underneath the Tomorrowland Terrace, and then back up the stairs into the old Astrojet Tower, which is what Kirk is showing you there. So here's the beautiful stairs that you get to go down.
Oh, that's beautiful. Nothing says future like moldy cement. Imagine how that thing smelled.
No, I don't want to think about it. Which is interesting because, like, you don't really think of Disneyland having an underground at all. You know, but there are some parts that are lower levels in Disneyland, just not an extensive tunnel system like the utilidors in Disney World. So when you get to the loading station in the upper level, this would be where the people mover cars used to load. The cars would stop like two at a time, I think, and then people would get in. 5 guests sitting in 4 rows, 1, 1, 1, 2, like the Kirks said, and they'd have a 3-point seatbelt restraint for the very open seating to just keep people from flying out of it. And the cars themselves were called the XPR, Experimental Prototype Rocket. And so they had the 2 large dragster wheel styles in the dragster style wheels in the back, but then they had a lot more wheels that you couldn't see that were actually hidden. And when they took off, they actually did a wheelie to add to the thrill, so it felt like you were lifting off the track, which is kind of interesting. I bet that did add to the thrill of it.
I wish I could have ridden this. It seems like it would be a fun attraction. I don't care that it would speed up and slow down fast. And we have attractions that break down all the time too. So I mean, like, this is not something new.
Well, So they had an onboard audio system that simulated a high-pitched electric engine revving. So any sounds you hear when you like see videos of this, wasn't actually the engine like doing that necessarily. There was a lot of it was just the audio system for it. So they would start off. Are we ready to start in like the beginning of the ride here? Are you
Sure?
I don't want to move on before you're ready. I do have a little. Look, it says for your safety. Oh, you have it too. Keep everything inside the vehicle.
Yeah. You know, you were talking about how when you're in tunnels, you don't want to have guests, you know, within that cone of safety, which is the term they use for basically like a 12-foot bubble around you to make sure that you're not touching anything. But I just thought about this the other day because I was on Space Mountain. There was a kid reaching his hand up, touching the tunnel. I'm like, what are we talking about? Like, I don't know how fast that is, but you could easily touch the top of that tunnel.
Maybe it's just in the places where it goes so fast it could actually like hurt somebody. Because I
don't know. I think we're going fast. I'm not putting my finger up there. No way.
You go faster in the Disney World one than you go in Disneyland. Because Disneyland's you just like it's a ramp to go up.
Yeah, no, it's cooking.
Alrighty, so you do kick off the ride. It counts. There's a little countdown that counts to, you know, the lights count down to green, kind of.
Yeah, like this over here, like a drag race, is on this side. Yep.
And then they immediately accelerated to 30 plus miles per hour and did a wheelie. But the first unbanked track was a sharp curve, right, kind of at the end there of heading into the hub, if you will. They would have to stop and slow down, not stop completely, but slow down significantly. You can see it. It's down here near the bottom on the side. They would have to stop so they could go and make that first turn. Then they would go inside the Star Traders complex, and they would pass by Sector 1 of Star Tours. They would hear some sounds from R2-D2.
Yeah, I was gonna say I heard C-3PO as well. Like you heard R2 and just like a quick little.
Yeah, because you're going into Star Tours and they're in that area. And then the first gag of the ride was present in this set of tunnels, which was a mirror that gave the impression that another rocket rod was driving straight towards you. So it was like, oh, we're going to crash at like 5 miles an hour. Then the car turned to the right and they went inside Space Mountain, where they got a little glimpse of the ride's dark exterior space. Just think like this is exactly where the people mover went. So same view. Then they went above the entrance of Space Mountain and Red Rocket's Pizza Port. Consequently, so if you remember, Red Rocket's Pizza Port was originally the mission, flight to the moon, mission to Mars attraction, right? This closed in 1992, and they were going to retrofit it with the Alien Encounter attraction, the extraterrestrial alien encounter attraction, as part of Tomorrowland 2055. But because of Euro Disney's failure and the poor reviews that it got in Magic Kingdom, it never ended up making it to Disneyland. So they just made it a restaurant instead.
Excuse me, I have my hand up.
Yes, Kurt.
They never asked my opinion. I love that ride. They shouldn't have gotten rid of it. Because guess what it is now? Nothing.
It's nothing.
Nothing. Actually, you know what? Fun fact, I've got an inside. They still have all the benches and the circle seating.
Well, like,
there's not a lot of props
why would they tear it?
But
they didn't need doing it.
I will tell you, it gets used as a break room. Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
It's like so weird because like all the screams are still in there, you know?
Yeah, that's weird. So after leaving that space, the rocket rods then went outside briefly, and then it would go behind the Carousel Theater, which was being transformed into Innovations at that time, 1998. Innovations, not innovations. Innovations in 1998. And they could see some of the large windows, what was going on inside there, just like you do on the People Mover. This is also where the storage track and maintenance space was for the People Mover and Rocket Rods was located, just FYI. Then it went into a series of dips and curves section, which intertwining with the submarines, the monorail, Autopia, and the wider curves allowed for more speed.
Yeah, that was the coolest part of the attraction. I think that would be the most fun. Cameras back then were great with low light, but it looked fantastic outside, especially this, because it's much more, if you look at the Do you have your layout real quick? You can just pull up your layout.
Yep.
When you look at the layout, it's on the left-hand side of the map that Kate is looking at. It's long. There's no quick curves. That probably was the most enjoyable part. Plus, there's an elevation change where when you're in Tomorrowland proper, you're essentially flat. So,
Yeah, and you can see on this map when it went around the Carousel of Progress Theater, and then you can see Autopia too, the road for Autopia kind of underneath there, underneath the tracks. So, yeah, so it went through that section of all those dips and curves, and then it went past the monorail station, and then it went back inside where it passed the Circle Vision Theater, just like the People Mover used to do, and the Tomorrowland Landing Complex, passed by its indoor queue, which is kind of funny, and then went back outside. In the indoor queue is where they had the second gag, by the way, which was an air cannon that shot at riders right before exiting. Then it went back outside, and then it finished at the same place where it started, and they would offload at the same place. So that was pretty much the ride.
yeah, it looks cool. And based on this person in the second row, having a blast. Everyone else, not so much.
Just that guy.
Yeah, it was just one person having a good time.
So
Mickey loved it.
Well, this is from opening day. So I have a few notes from opening day. Mario Andretti, he was one of the ones that sat with Mickey Mouse, the Rocket Rods, for its first official spin around Tomorrowland, although he had gotten to experience it the night before. So it's not really official. And then upon returning...
Why? Pinocchio.
I know. Upon returning to the station after one of his multiple rides that day, he was asked, Mario Andretti, you have raced some of the fastest cars in the world. What do you think of the Rocket Rods? And he responded, this is pure excitement. I want to do it again.
Oh, man. Dude, you can almost smell that envelope filled with cash that I was slipping him. You know, you could just feel it in that.
He's like reading the cue card behind the camera. He's like, it was pure excitement.
I really enjoyed it, and I would like to do it again. Can I leave now?
He's like, hold on, let me put on my glasses. Like, what does that say?
Get out of here, Mario.
So, what went wrong with the Rocket Rods? Well, we've already kind of...
It was perfect.
It was perfect.
And that's the end of the episode, and it's still running today. So, enjoy it. Go to Disneyland.
So, due to the delays in Florida Test Track, obviously, General Motors pulled out of their sponsorship, so they opted not to sponsor the attraction. They also lost the funding from Oriental Land Company because they couldn't share the development costs of putting this in at Tokyo Disney. So if Oriental Land wanted this, and they had a lot of money to build their park, if they wanted this, they could pay for the development of it, and then Disney could just kind of like benefit and like copy it and put it in Disneyland. But because they didn't want it, they lost all the funding from that. So the result was a cheaper ride with insufficient infrastructure. The track wasn't banked properly, and the vehicles and the track both failed. So Tony Baxter said this about it. He said, we all knew the track needed to be banked in order to keep the speed up. Once you made the reduction to go with the level of the People Mover track, it had to slow down to take each curve. That was to keep you from flying out. So, which is important.
Safety first.
Not long after its debut, the Rocket Rods began experiencing so many multiple mechanical issues. Even like from the opening day video that I watched it break down like 3 times in the time that this guy was on it. Like it didn't go fast. So what happened was the forces on the cars and their motors, the wheels from the constant speed changes led to colossal downtime and ongoing repairs. The vehicles would either get knocked out of alignment with the track, which would cause the computer system to shut down the ride entirely, or would simply cause ride vehicles to break down. And also, the continuous fluctuations in speed frazzled the ride's temperamental software systems that precisely monitored like how far apart the cars were to keep them from crashing into each other. So if it couldn't sense what it needed to sense, they would shut the ride down for safety, which makes sense because you don't want those cars colliding at high speed up on top of those beams. That's a no. And so the slowing and accelerating the rods continuously threw off their block brake monitoring, stalling the ride's operation and bringing its already terrible capacity to unacceptable numbers. So,
hang on, time out. I just want to go ahead. You go ahead.
But this is where we got the single rider line from, was from this attraction, because they invented it because of their low capacity, the ride's unpredictable nature, and the 1-1-2 seating. They needed a single rider line.
What I was going to say is, in the middle of your explanation, you talk about the block brake monitoring system. And I only know this because of when I did a behind-the-scenes tour at Busch Gardens. Block brakes are how you visually break down locations on where you could stop the vehicle safely. So in a roller coaster, in the instance, would be brake run to brake run, right? So like you have the loading station, go through an attraction, and then there's always a section where it's flat, and there's usually staircases because we're elevated on a roller coaster, where they could either slow, and sometimes they have to, depending on the elements that are coming forward, or they could actually stop in case of emergency. So they look at the rides in block brakes. So those are systematic brake stop locations if you needed to exit people. So if that was out of consistency, they would never, ever send another vehicle down, and they would have to shut it off. But that's what a block brake is. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And it does seem like software was a major... There was some hardware issues too, and obviously non-banked, having to speed up and slow down, but Test Track does that a lot too. I feel like it's because the front wheels and the back wheels weren't the same, and the fact that they made it do a wheelie, and it also on a single tube in the center, where I feel like if they had something that was more locking in place rather than that, but maybe that was for engineering purposes so that it could, but it seemed like if it was out of alignment, that would stop it as well. If you look at how Test Track physically looks, it straight looks like a slot car, you know? So, but Test Track is riddled with the same issues that Rocket Rods is, and it's down all the time too. So it's very, very similar technology, and it makes a lot of sense they had. I mean, the biggest things to me, breaking down, of course, and long lines. Those are two problems that we still exist in the Disney parks. Like, go on Rise of the Resistance, and people will complain all the time. They love the attraction, but they complain about everything else. So, I don't know. If you're thinking about making an attraction or a ride, the bigger the capacity, as long as you're not hindering the story you're trying to tell or the thematic, and it makes sense ride vehicle-wise, go as much capacity as possible. Guests will love it. They'll just ride it.
No. I think Dick Nunes was onto something there when he talked about capacity is king. I think he's right, you know, but not capacity is king trumping over ride experience. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's why I had to preface that, because you could just, everything could be an Omnimover, and that I'll just stop talking. That would be awesome. Just make everything an Omnimover. I'm cool with that.
I also mentioned that the Rocket Rods famously burned through rubber tires like firewood. Like, they had to replace tires on that all the time because of how much they had to break and stop so quickly. And 45-minute waits turned into 2 to 3 hour waits like that, like as soon as it cut down. So Disney closed the attraction in July. They had opened it in May. They closed it in July, but the ride kept having frequent breakdowns, unhappy guests. So in September of 2000, Disney announced the attraction would be closed for an extensive refurbishment. And it would be down for about 7 months. 7 months later, they announced that it would be down permanently. And Cynthia Harris admitted to the New York Times that this high-speed attraction was never able to perform to its design show standards. The problem was a budget-conscious decision to run the high-speed rods on the People Movers unbanked track. So that was the end of the Rocket Rods.
Yeah. Did you ever ride the Rocket Rods? Because you're at Disneyland.
I don't remember ever doing it, but it was only in those 2 years, and I don't think I went to Disneyland in those 2 years. So no, I never went on it. I vaguely remember the People Mover, and I know. So it was just a short period of time, and it was down like half the time it was open, you know?
Yeah. So if you had been or experienced Rocket Rods, you are of a very select few.
Mm-hmm. They did, however, in 2008, they were proposing a new revamp of Tomorrowland. And I thought this was really interesting because they brought back the idea of rocket bikes into Tomorrowland because if anybody's been to Disneyland's Tomorrowland in a while, Disney World's too for that matter, they just need a lot of help. Like Disneyland's is like half of it doesn't even function right now. It's just all kind of empty buildings and space. It's terrible. Like it really needs a lot of love. These rocket rod tracks are still in Disneyland. You literally can still see them everywhere because they never did anything with them. They just left them there. So in 2008, they were trying to figure out what they could do, and they proposed this kind of like futuristic Tomorrowland, a lot of light cycle run vehicles, if you see that. So they proposed it again as part of this giant revamp, and you can see some more of the concept art here, but it just never happened. Probably budget reasons is my guess. But you can also see this is what the vehicles would have look like up close.
I like that they illuminate too.
Mm-hmm. Very, very similar to the light cycle, which makes me think that maybe because they were working on the light cycle run, they just decided to not make something that was so similar to it.
It also reminds me of straddle coasters, which are a relatively new thing. It's like a family style coaster where it's all that single rider, like Dark Coaster is in Busch Gardens, which is I think you're on a snowmobile. So, yeah, I think you're on a wave runner on the one they built in SeaWorld in San Diego. So straddle coasters are a thing. Maybe they'll put a straddle coaster on it.
Could be. Well, they were going to call them the Beamway. So you can say the Beamway.
Beamway.
B-E-A-M. Beamway. Rocket bikes. And so, and then they were going to do rocket jetpacks. So that was like instead of the rocket jets like you had, like if you look at this picture, people are like laying on their side flying like Superman. So that was something we could have gotten in Tomorrowland, but never did. And so we would have this whole giant renovation of Tomorrowland that just kind of fizzled out, likely because of I want to say 2008 was when we went through like a recession. So I'm guessing it was largely a financial decision, like all these things are. Well, that is all I have for rocket rods today, unless you have anything else you'd like to share.
Moving right along.
I think the most important thing, I can see why people get so upset about rocket rods and why I'm kind of upset about it. It's not because it was necessarily a bad ride concept. It was because it was poorly implemented to the point where it knocked out a guest favorite. Don't erase me for this.
Yeah. I think I respect and honor and understand and agree that that's probably the sentiment of why, is because we lost something we loved, and you have the hindsight to know that it didn't work out, and we now have nothing.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. If it had been a really amazing ride, people eventually would have been like begrudgingly like, yeah, okay, this is okay. Even if we lost People Mover and I'm sad, this is okay. But that's always the risk they do when they pull a really great attraction. You got to replace it with something that's even cooler, because otherwise people are going to revolt. So
Stitch's Great Escape was never good.
That was weird. It was a weird attraction. It was very strange.
It was this attempt to dumb down and soften a scary attraction, and it was Mel and I went on it, and I go, Mel, I want the old one back. It was weird. The jokes weren't funny. I'm not the biggest Lilo and Stitch or Stitch fan, so that's also, I know I have a bias there. But I love the original attraction. It was original content. OC. Original content for the parks. Like, I love when they created Figment for the parks. Like, how cool is that? And now Figment, is recognizable outside of the parks. It's just, I don't know. That stuff is so cool.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of Distory. We appreciated going on the rocket rods with y'all and reliving that experience, and also seeing where the single rider line came from. So that was pretty neat. Do you have any final thoughts, Kirk, before we wrap up?
I wish I could have done a wheelie at 35 miles per hour, and long live Eisner.
Oh, no. That was not called for. No.
It's not. It's my stitch.
That's the reason we lost the People Mover. Come on.
You asked me if I had any final words. Those were my final words. You immediately stomped them out.
1994, Kirk, 1994. All right, moving on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciated you hanging out with us for this one. And we'll be back next week with something new that we don't know yet, but it'll be great. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next time for Distory.
Thanks, guys. See yous.
Bye, everyone.